Hi, I'm Max Belmonte, and this is Two Unemployed Actors, the podcast. In this episode, I'll be talking to Matthew Diener, who is the CEO of Screen Producers Australia. As the more avid listeners will know already, I have 3 television projects I'm developing, because sometimes as an actor, you have to create your own opportunities. So this podcast episode is a great way to get an understanding of what it's like to operate at the moment as both an emerging producer, but also as an established production company. We're going to be talking about some of the big issues and opportunities for the industry and more right here on Two Unemployed.
Two unemployed actors, two unemployed actors. They're just between projects.
Welcome, Matthew.
Thanks, Max. Thanks for having me.
Why don't I let you describe what it is that Screen Producers Australia does?
It's an industry association. So that starts with an idea of collectivism, people coming together or organisations coming together because the sum of the parts are greater than individually. And it's a business association as a starting point. So the common thread amongst everyone that's in the membership is that they see themselves as producers or contributing to production as businesses rather than individuals. So that means there's a set of obligations, ownership pieces, IP management and employment skills that you've got to have in the job that we help people to, I guess, navigate and find easy pathways for. And the organisation's got sort of 3 remits. It does a lot of work in industrial frameworks so that we're all gig-based, right? You go from gig to gig to gig, and you need an easy way for people to come together with new employment, either as writers or actors or directors. So we collectively bargain, if you like, for terms and conditions that make it a bit easier to plug and play for all the cast and crew and different parts of the sector. We also then represent the sector and our members more specifically to governments about what's relevant for them and how they can help the sector. And then the third thing we do is, I call it glue. We glue everyone together because producers have to get a big group of people together from both the commissioning side and the creative side and then the output side. So we need to find pathways to bring them all together, and we do that in a big way at the Gold Coast at an event called Screen Forever, which you have been to.
Twice and survived. No, it's great, really good. And particularly from the perspective of an emerging producer, it's kind of like, what's the, I've got to read the room pretty quick and work out, what's the temperature in the industry, what's going on, who do I need to talk to, what do I need to say? And it's a great environment for someone to quickly learn. Yeah,
we might do a deep dive into that. But apart from the physical big conference, we do a lot of different online courses and events and little like gatherings and other things throughout the year. So but you're right. If you through the prism of an emerging producer, or anyone really starting in the sector, you sort of want to grasp the full sector, but without being submerged by it. And we hope that there's about 1,000 people that go to the conference. So it's not like an international market, which can be sort of 10,000 people and a bit overwhelming. But it's also not like a very small sort of grouping of people where maybe you can't quite see a bit beyond the horizon, a little bit there about what's going on and all that sort of stuff. So we try to provide a good mid-size, what's the 3 bears in the porridge? Just right.
The middle, just perfect.
Just middle. And for that reason, it's meant to be friendly and engaging and interesting. But I think more importantly, it's about building networks.
And I think, again, from an emerging producer perspective, just because I'm selfish and that's me, I think, you do offer a lot of resources. Well, you do offer resources for not just the established production companies and those with runs on the board and credits to their name. It's people like me who are still fighting for their first TV show credit. And I think Business Essentials was a good course to really sort of drop in and get a sense check from industry professionals how what the lay of the land is and how you can structure yourself.
Yeah, and that's a sort of a 2-day, was it 2-day course?
Yep.
We do online. We sort of feel like with producers overall and the community, you need to welcome and encourage people into the space, because I think a lot of people know what an actor is, they know what a writer is, sort of know what a director is, but producing is one of those where does it stop and start kind of conversations.
It's like a dark art.
Yeah, but it in some ways it's the most. Everything's critical, but if you don't have production people, producers of what's going on, you don't have a show at all.
Yeah.
You can sort of get by with fudging some of the other stuff sometimes, but if you haven't got a whole framework around it, then you haven't got a production, as I say. So having a resource for people coming new to the sector or who've been in the industry, and sometimes we call them slashies. In your case, you're someone who's been in one area of the sector and is interested in learning more. I think a lot of people who are creatives want more understanding and control over their work now, so that they're in control of, or as best they can be, sort of more in control of what they would like to have as a career. So there's more and more people in our membership that are writer producers or acting producers or director producers who want to produce maybe with other people or on their own, but start with also wanting to be at the helm of the creative process. So, those courses are a way of giving people that language and maybe understanding, so when they go into a room, they're not completely blindsided about what the hell's going on.
It's certainly less intimidating that way. The other course I remember distinctly was the prep for your first Screen Forever. Yeah, right. So that you can you know how to approach it, when to start booking meetings, how to go about it, like the whole. It just makes it even more less intimidating. Or in my case, it's not so much the intimidation and the imposter syndrome, which is ever present, but just practically, how do I prepare to get the most out of this visit as a first timer?
There's a lot of the one thing I'd say about the sector is, and it's not everyone, but I'd say that the reason a lot of people in the sector, a lot of people in the membership, most of the organisational structure is about people being generous, participating in a generous sort of spirit because they want to collaborate and work with people. And that same spirit is there for giving people a hand up into the sector. So as long as, you have a reasonable amount of EQ and you're responsible in your own behaviours and engagements with people. And I think it's really important to always think of every contact with someone is an important piece, and there's a sort of a spider web analogy of one relationship who you think, oh, well, they're just an EA maybe or something, and then all of a sudden you discover they're an EP on a project and you go, hang on, did I treat that person with as much respect as I did maybe someone who was supposedly in my mind higher up the hierarchy? No, having all of those relationships going all the time is important, and people who've been in the sector a long time recognise also that new people coming into the sector have got great ideas. They might want to work with them. They might want to help encourage them in different ways. So I hope that you've had that experience with some of the relationships and the pathways people can provide for.
Absolutely, I think, and both from dealing with commissioners directly, but also through production companies as well. Knowing that until I get my first credit, I might have to rely a lot on an existing production company who's delivered to a commissioner before in order to get the project into development, let alone made. But it's been constructive.
And just to touch on that point, that it can be a source of frustration for new people coming into this industry, right? So, it's not that it isn't rocket science, but it's also very relationship based. So, and that's because I always think of the risks associated in different parts of the industry in spending what can be a large amount of money, usually not their own decision-making money. They've got to be responsible for lots of people, whether that's government or commissioners. And so their natural starting point is going to be to risk averse and cautious about taking on new concepts, new people, new businesses. So you have to really prove yourself over a longer haul, and there's a bit of a delayed gratification you've got to get to turn up, keep turning up, keep turning up, and you're right, the pathways with other people who've got relationships can build those own relationships. But I do think persistence is the key, and I think as long as you have the key building blocks of being a pretty decent person, having some decent ideas, and consistency will get you through the door eventually and get you something made. It does happen. It always happens.
So tenacity through a professional lens.
Yeah,
I like it. It's good. It makes sense.
Yeah,
I feel like that's how I'm walking in the industry. So soon I'll be running, hopefully.
I think look, what doesn't the difficulty for people, of course, is that tenacity alone doesn't necessarily pay the bills. So you've got to have a strategy as a someone early in the sector or emerging to have a way of bankrolling yourself while you're being patient. And that's hard for a lot of people, right? We're not now more and more as a society used to delayed gratification. We're used to dopamine fixes on our phones every 30 seconds. So there's a sort of a challenge with this industry where you've got to find ways to, I think, have an income stream that doesn't dominate your capacity to keep building your profile or your skills in the sector or your products. But that, and once you sort of got that balance right, you should be keeping on going, and being in a situation is, I think, to meet as many people as possible is the other key. You know, you're never going to, there's an old expression about needing to be in the room with people. As much as we can rely and want to do follow-ups and Zooms and phone calls and everything, but being in the room, there's nothing like a human connection. So I'm always a big advocate for anyone being mobile. It doesn't mean you have to live in a big city. It's advantages for doing that in terms of contact, but it can also be disadvantaged as well, because it's hard to get together. But making regular visits or trying to connect with people at events, and the industry is pretty important.
So we touched on a few points already, but I'd like to hear your perspective. You know, what are the issues right now?
Oh my gosh, where do we start?
Pulls out the shopping list.
Yeah. There is a shopping list, and it's also a bit overwhelming sometimes when you go in to speak to a minister or someone that is able to influence the sector positively. It's always a challenge trying to focus a couple of things rather than come up with 100 things.
I guess I could also say, what are the opportunities? Now, that's probably a more constructive way to approach it.
Yeah, exactly. There are opportunities, and there's things we want to fix as a sector. And it also, the benefits of that will depend a little bit on the immediacy of some of those things. Depends on what sort of genre you're in, what sort of stage of career you're in, all those sort of things. But the first and foremost piece we've been trying to get it fixed for a while is having a framework for the streaming services to deliver ongoing support to the sector. So support is the wrong way to describe it. Actually, streamers to do an ongoing amount of investment in the sector, which is not really support, it's investment in their own businesses, but it's supporting, as a consequence, people who have careers in the industry, plus also the work that's going on. So I think about it in multiple ways. And as a consequence, you're also getting to the Australian public culture. But that piece, the reason we want a framework of sorts is that as we've seen currently, international streaming businesses have pulled right back from streaming. Now, it's not, maybe there's an argument that they're doing that because they haven't, had the press go button pressed by the government for a regulation framework. But it's also that global decision making easily can turn a tap on or off for a reasonably small territory like Australia. If for example, as has happened, a global business such as Disney need to pull back on investments because they're looking to reshape their cost base in different ways. So the consequence of an industry that's very dependent on very large global international businesses is that we can just be flung about like a bit of flotsam in the ocean by corporate board.
And you can feel like the rounding error at times, because I think
absolutely.
I think you're touching on globally, you know, the streaming wars, as people call it, and where and by that, what do we mean by that? Like, my perception of that, it would be over-investing in content in order to get your market share. Yeah. So they're over-investing to outgrow everyone else, because when it settles, maybe there's only going to be a few players left. So everyone's trying to fight for market share. Now that sort of pulled back because they realised they actually do probably need to make a profit. Yeah. And so that sort of pulled them back globally, even before we get to, you know, a quota for Australian content. Exactly. There's been a market share sort of competition piece, and then that's come at its own consequences. I mean, disruption from tech in our industry, as for other industries, the internet is a broader sort of thinking piece, disrupting lots of things, lots of marketplaces, and businesses adjusting, but maybe without a sustainability to that on a global level. So, that's being called in a bit by Wall Street and investment and other people, depending on what debt is otherwise owned on businesses. So I think it's fair to say that Netflix is in
a profit position, even if it has a lot of debt, it has a profit position as an ongoing business. So it's a profitability piece based on its global size. Others are maybe, depending on what you read and how, in different frames. But, as you say, the issue is not that Australia doesn't give a good return to those businesses. It absolutely does, in that it is... for a the challenge for Australia has always been that as a predominantly English language Western country, we will happily, as an audience, receive and consume American and English content. We've grown up with a reasonable strong diet of it. So in order to have some layer of local content in people's diets, you've really got to push that to happen, because the market forces of supply into this territory are very cheap. So you can supply into this territory for nothing, and therefore all the money that's generated from the content that's already made in other territories is profit for them. So it means that the reason I explain all of that is that it's not a profit problem for people to be making content in Australia. It's more that they'd like to maximise their profits in this territory. They're going to, if they have to contribute some investments to local content in a more robust way, they're still going to be in great profit. But I think as a global position, they're trying to maximise this market as a profit base, even because maybe in other territories they're not making as much.
And I feel like it's proven in when we look at the free-to-air model and how there's been minimums there for some times. So it's not like it's a guess.
Yeah.
We've seen it happen, and we've seen what having those minimums can do, even when they're removed, or when it comes to children's TV.
The evidence is there that without those major moments, you don't get continuing investment in the genres, and I think in the free-to-air market case, you've got a very clear lining up now that these are businesses that only really want to produce. And we can sort of somewhat understandably, for their own business case, they want to only produce sport or reality TV or news. So something that's immediate and requiring people to be on those businesses day in, day out. And that's because of the advertising model. But
live for advertisers at that moment.
And the same with I call it, everything else is competition driven, which encourages you to be at the table or the screen at the moment things are happening. So you want to understand, if you've been following the maths or the X Factor or one of the competition-based shows, you really want to be able to see what happens, because that's your continuing interest. And it's the same for sport. It's always the same thinking. So
and those reality shows, I mean, some of them are so profitable for the networks. It's not a tap that they want to turn off. So we keep seeing more and more.
Look, I think that the shows are not. There's a range of budgets on those shows, but some of them are reasonably expensive, and they come with some cast costs in judges and other people, and reasonably big setup. But you can integrate and stimulate a lot of marketing revenue and advertising revenue through those outlets, and in different forms. And so therefore they generate a good turnover for the brands, for the broadcasters. I think that the question sometimes in my mind is whether they're getting the return on their sport investments, because
it's some big numbers,
a huge cost.
Huge numbers,
and the numbers that are going into sport are not going into the broader sector. So I sort of always like,
as a guy with scripted content, I'm still not happy yet in this whole reality TV and sport conversation.
And it's meant that the only real places for scripted have been really now the streaming services and the ABC and SBS. And SBS doesn't have very much resource, and the regular, the small-ish regulation that's on traditional media, including Foxtel.
I feel like that's a nice segue back to streamers, because, again, my perception of the industry at the moment and feedback from even well-established production companies that would look over and give me some constructive feedback on all three television shows
that you're doing.
The emails start with, or the conversations start with, as you know, at the moment, the streamers aren't commissioning because of this impending legislation in relation to a minimum quota for Australian content. So when you're fighting for a slice of the pie, and that pie is dramatically reduced, it's certainly it's quite disconcerting, and certainly it's another roadblock. And I guess it feels like everyone's kind of holding their breath, whether they're emerging or they've got runs on the board, waiting for this legislation to drop.
And if you're talking to some of the more established production companies, part of their challenge, and your show, for example, might not be a streamer show, it might be an ABC show, but those businesses are in this sort of hold their breath, tighten the belt moment, where they've possibly been in development for a long time with some of the streamers, but not been given the green light, which means they've incurred a lot of costs as development kind of processes, reductions.
It's not cheap, and the payoff is a long way away.
So they're not releasing sort of money and resources, which means that for people wanting to partner with them, they haven't really got that. They're in that sort of contract and sort of just keep things sort of humming, so they can't really spend a lot of time and maybe energy in thinking about commissions right at the moment. So yes, because they're sort of trying to get through there was a sort of a survive till 25 motto that was going on in America, which is in I think a worse state than Australia in terms of production industry from all accounts from people that have been travelling. But that's a mantra, and of course it doesn't help. But it people to kind of go, oh, what do we do in the meantime? But and there are commissioning that's still happening in different forms. And I think always, it was talked about at Screen Forever that there is still opportunities in feature films for people as well. So we're talking a little bit particularly about scripted or maybe factual series on streaming or television. But I think emerging producers can often still make a mark in short films or in a production of maybe a lower budget type of film, and not have to go through the same gatekeepers. There are gatekeepers. There are in terms of distribution and other things for feature films, but they can sometimes be, if you're looking to explore new talent and new ideas, they can be a more freer way to do that, and you can get support for, particularly if you've got emerging talent that people want to see showcased in different ways.
So it's not so much the landscape's changed; it's just that the tap's turned off quite a decent amount when it comes to streamers commissioning just about anything.
Yeah, I think the streamers. I'm trying to think I think it was 2017 or that. I think it was actually 20. I can't remember when Netflix launched in Australia, but maybe it was 2017. I'm going to have to review that. But when they came and the others came, it was in the market. The same thing you were talking about internationally. They were looking to land subscribers and compete with each other. So the good thing about all this framework is that Australians do really enjoy Australian content. They want it to be well made. They want it to be comparable in production values and storytelling as their American or United Kingdom projects particularly, but increasingly global projects from other territories that we get access to. But the way that those businesses were entering this market was to go, right, well, we need to dial up Australian content because that's going to give us access to audiences who love this stuff, and we're going to be able to market it in different ways. And yes, it's also a way to tell the government that we're doing this. You don't need to regulate us. So there was there was a degree of investment that is slowed down over the last sort of probably 12 months that was there for a few years. And now we have the job of trying to get that sorted still. The deadline for it was the 1st of July.
Yeah, there was a lot of people sort of holding their breath through the entire month of June, but it
hasn't happened yet.
And I think Parliament in town, they're not in Canberra at the moment. Are they not sitting at the moment?
They're in their winter recess, so there's a few weeks where nothing more will be done. And there's ongoing conversations with the minister about this and the timing. And there is a sort of a narrowing window before the next election, which I think, who knows when it will be. It could be this year, but it's probably more likely to be the start of next year. But, governments, what we're talking about is not a straightforward thing either, right? So I sort of say to people that it's very, very hard, but it is the easiest part of what you can do in terms of talking to government is ask for money, because money is still a debate about resources, and people have got to be fighting internally in governments to work out how to allocate resource. You've got to put cases forward. You've got to deal with
politicians doing politician things.
Yeah, but all of that is easy compared to asking for new regulation. And new regulation always comes with layers upon layers upon layers of sort of, process and other things. But in our case, what we're asking for is the regulation of global, very large, in fact, the largest businesses on the planet in some certain ways, Amazon, Netflix, we are asking our government to take on global regulation, and we're also asking them to take on the regulation of commercial service businesses that are here in this market that happen to also own all of the newspapers, i.e. Nine and News Corp. So these are, you can see why it's also taken a long time for government to do this, because it takes a level of bravery to
Some
go
chunky
into
stakeholders.
this.
Yes.
Chunky, that's a great way to describe it. Yes, people with a bit of gristle.
Yes.
So the way to done this is to be probably as resilient and persistent as an emerging producer needs to be in going in constantly and asking for the same sort of things and being unflappable about what is needed and how to get from A to B and not giving up. So,
Best of luck. Godspeed.
the
Matthew.
ongoings on. Yeah, I know.
I think at one stage you were quoted in the media, talking about numbers like 20%, and streamers were talking about numbers like 2%. So do we know a number or?
No, we don't know a number, and there's still a model decision. So we dial it back in terms of what we want a system that is secured, I think, is the best way to describe it, given how hard it is to get this sort of reform done, and is robust enough for people not to sort of feel like it's dodgy or being rorted by the businesses involved in it, and has got a capacity to move as the industry moves. So we want this sort of framework. Sustainable. And then in terms of the quantum, we've looked to other territories that are best practice as to how much they are asking of their local or international streamers to contribute. So we've kind of gone for metrics and a model similar to Australia, similar to other countries that have regulated already. And they include France and Germany and Italy and soon to be Canada.
Yeah, because there was a joint statement issued. Spain, France, Italy, Portugal, Germany, Ireland, New Zealand and Canada.
Someone's done their research. Very good.
I have, because obviously I'm invested, but also in many ways in the success of this, but also building on that point, because it sounds like some of those markets have achieved. Yeah,
some of them have already gotten there, and they got their. Europe has always been quite progressive. At the moment, there's a list of reforms on tech and privacy and AI and data handling and all these sort of layers upon layers that started to be done in 2017 in Europe, and Australia. Look, we have had a set of, I suppose we had Conservative government for a while, for almost 10 years, but which isn't naturally at the forefront of regulatory reform. And then, there's a bit of catch up that a new government's got to do, but then there's also the forces against reform that, any government's got to deal with. So, but to your point, yes, Europe's had it since 2017. The benefit of what their framework is an installation of an overall scheme in which individual countries need to implement.
Right.
And France was quick to implement at this sort of actually 25.5%. It's got different layers to it, and there's parts of it that are equivalent to what we're asking for overall. But overall, you'd say that's a system. Germany's just announced its levels. It wants to be about 20%, might be a bit lower.
Okay.
Italy's had it for a few years. Canada's announced the stage 1 piece of its regulation, which is a 5% revenue-based quota, which is not about making Canadian content, but more about just helping the system to operate.
Right.
And the Canadian quota will come in later. So, there's different pieces that have been done by different countries. The first wave in Europe is a very big block to go toe-to-toe with some of those big companies. So, they were probably the first leader, maybe before some of these businesses were as established in government relations as they are now.
That's handy.
So they went hard and fast and quick,
Yeah,
and individual countries have now, as they come online, have gone sometimes lower. Some of the rhetoric from the streamers is, Croatia's at 1% or da, da, da.
Right,
Sometimes those individual countries have had a lot of resistance from the streamers in terms of getting to a point of support.
Position of power is a lot less, and they might just say, look, any deal's better than none at the moment. Let's go
a little
for the
bit,
door.
yeah. And so, that's where Australia's got to figure out where it's going to eventually land. We've put the case; it's up to the government to make a determination. But Australia's got the fortunate part of Australia's system is it's not these aren't new the concept of new measure of interventions in our market are not new. This has been around since the 60s and 70s. So there's examples in Europe where they've treaded a little softer because there hasn't been a history of regulation or IP development or businesses like yours being supported through that system, and there's not necessarily the same capability to develop their own work. So they've gone in a bit softer, partly for that reason, or partly because they've been stared down as a small territory. Just go, we're going to leave. Now that's a rhetoric that happens in this territory by some of those bigger businesses, which to me makes zero sense if a government really was to believe that, because they're making a lot of revenue in this market. And there may be brinkmanship and theatrics around that from them, as has happened with the media bargaining code, different levels. But there is I think there's it's interesting, there's a big mixture of behaviours from the streamers. Some of them are much more global citizen thinking and behind the scenes very quietly talking to us all the time, and government saying we don't really mind, we just like some flexibility here and there, and
we need to invest anyway. We want to.
Absolutely, we see ourselves as responsible corporate citizens. We want to be seen like that with the industry, and we're happy to partner in different ways. And you can sort of get a sense of the businesses that show up different times, sponsor things, get involved in stuff. And then there's others that have an edict, mandate maybe from others that they're. And I'm not blaming the individuals in the ground here, but it's a global edict maybe to not resist at all costs, or type of individual exercise in brinkmanship that they're trying to play. And the problem, I think, for them, and they get frustrated as well, they get swept up into the same sort of band maybe as their worst case or their representative groups that are kind of fighting really hard against it, and they're going, oh, this isn't really us.
We don't really want other people telling us how to run our business and that sort of stuff.
That's the sort of overall message, but some of them don't really mind because they can see that the measures are going to be beneficial for their overall business anyway and their strategies. So, this is our sector's a common resource. I always think we like a garden that you've got to have many people tilling the soil, planting stuff, watering, fertilising, bringing to life lots of projects. And it can't be that you sort of can try to isolate and just, we're just going to do that little thing here. We've got to kind of look after the whole common resource of people and business and care and support and all that sort of thing. So people can lean into that, and companies in their behaviours can lean into it and others cannot. I think what the government's role is to not let that be dependent on an individual or a strategy for 1 year. It's trying to go, well, we need a healthy garden overall. We're going to set a framework to help the garden work, which some of you don't mind because you're turning up anyway to water the soil and plant your plants. Some of you are kind of taking the piss because you're never turning up and you're probably maybe in the cover of darkness grabbing all the plants and running off. So we're going to sort of manage this by bringing it all together in some sort of hopefully fair way. What that level is, it sort of depends on the outcome of where the government's scheme is, and also just we don't. The challenge for us is as a group externally to the businesses, we don't know what their numbers are. They don't reveal their numbers. They don't tell us or publicly what their earnings are, what their expenditure levels are. So we're making assessments in terms of what we should position the industry as based on what other territories have done, rather than understanding actually what individual businesses are doing, because they haven't told us that. So we'll see. That's going to be one of those things that comes out, I think, hopefully soon, and
everyone's
waiting. Proof will be in the pudding.
I think, whether it's an established producer with several credits, a production company, or me, just trying to get the first credit, it's certainly, I think the timing too of this conversation at this stage with the end of the streaming wars has just meant that, there's a lot less happening. And I feel like that vibe is, people are commissioning less, and when they are commissioning, the budgets are less, or they're asking more for the dollar. Yes,
that's possibly well true, because until the regulation comes in and there's an absolute spend, then they'll be meeting that spend, and they probably won't be as it might be, but they might be a little more relaxed about the level they've got to hit in terms of budget. The other thing I'd say is that I think I've observed and spoken to our French counterparts a couple of times and about this, and they have had concerns that the measures in different territories can result in just 4 commissions or 2 commissions with a lot of money, which kind of cuts out many projects, which can be equally valuable for the services, but it might be that their resourcing and person power can't necessarily meet lots of commissions, so they sort of maybe aggregate or think big is best.
Fewer bigger.
Which can cut out a lot of opportunities for people who have got smaller ideas, or maybe are never going to be given, a $30, $40 million commission on the first hit. So my encouragement in whatever form that happens is to keep a watching brief around that. And if it ends up being that, essentially there are 3 or 4 businesses or people or directors or writers, that are getting all this work, but the huge crew, yes, you want the show to be competitive and have high production values, but I just think we've got to manage, and those businesses need to be in their gardener sort of responsibility. Well, we need to probably have part of this allocation to smaller projects to just give people a bit of a break here and do the sort of thing that you'd hope that our national broadcasters are continuing to do. But
I get that, because the objective is still a sustainable Australian industry with Australian stories. So I get that, and that makes sense. And
you've got to test people. You've got to have some allocation or capacity to go, well, we don't want to let this see what it can be, or this individual or this combination of people deliver this result.
Yeah.
If it doesn't entirely work, okay, no one's going to get hung and drawn and quartered over it. But if it does work, it's got a capacity to deliver. And I think that's hard for a subscription service sometimes. But at the same time, I look at some of the moves that the streamers have made over the last couple of years, and some of that stuff you go, well, that was rushed. That was went into production too quick. That's a lot of money on that show, and you could have been that there were 10 smaller projects made with that budget, and you could have had a better shot at something that really stuck with audiences, because you can see it not being commissioned in season 2. Now, look, we're looking through the benefit of hindsight, and
of course,
crystal
it's
ball
easy
gazing.
then, isn't it?
Of course, it's easy. We are happy. I'm happy to be a couch critic of
we
any.
can tell them exactly where they went wrong.
Yeah, and we know that job is super hard. So I'm not going to, but it's a shame you sort of look at it and go, and maybe it's about a discipline or a mandate internally to kind of go, we've got to think about this whole system and the pipelines of different participants. And again, some of the businesses do this. They are thinking about it already. They might not talk about it openly, but they're investing in different ways. And I give them, full credit when I observe it, because often they're not necessarily being as credible up front. They go, that's quite strategic. And then others are just like, we don't either have that level of sophistication yet. But, regulation will also bring, I think, a responsibility formally into the market from some of the businesses who've got to invest in the people to be the commissioners and handling the work. Because it's a game of tennis. You've got to have someone that can hit a ball back to the industry after, and if those people aren't, we have an award each year that I really like for our SPAR Awards, which is the Commissioner of the Year, because it's a way of giving producing community and the full production community a way of acknowledging that work that someone's doing on the other side of this fence, and it's significant and big, and hats off to it. The
carrot and the stick is helping the government with the legislation, and the carrot is rewarding those great behaviours
with an award. Well, I don't know if that's as sort of binary or simplistic as that, but yes, it is. I think it's just important for us to, and just to signal that we do see the good work that's going on the other side, because it's not. I think people can go. It's just with thinking about their own world, and I think the best strategies again for emerging producers and any producers really is to put yourselves in the shoes of the people you're talking to all the time.
And doing that's great advice, because you've got to understand the business you're in. I think the more you do that, the more power you might have in a position where you don't always have a lot of power as an emerging voice. And to that point, I guess, looking at the lay of the land now, I feel like risk averse is certainly where commissioners are. And even in looking at putting stuff into development, when knowing that they might have 13 projects in development with 3 that'll actually make it to screen, very looking for a lot of similar stuff in terms of like no sci-fi, no period pieces because it's too expensive, horror's risky. We're falling back to the comfortable stuff, like more procedurals, more dead body in a small town type stuff.
No, you maybe have more of the coalface conversations than me on the
whole
type of
that whole sentence was triggering. So but yeah.
But I don't know that I've got a. I feel like that's.
It could be unique to everyone's journey, whether you're a factual film. Yeah, okay. I get it.
It sort of depends on the last conversation and with who you have it.
Yeah.
So it changes on a dime sometimes, because people, and I think that you see it. I would encourage people to go to as many kind of commissioner conversations as they can have. But there's you notice that some of the businesses maybe they either don't know what they really need, or they don't want to say it too directly. They can kind of talk in generic terms about commissioning, but then there are other people that are very clear, and they can go, you know what, we need 4 shows this year. They might not do it as publicly as that. This is the problem. But they go, we're trying to find something for a male demographic in this sort of band.
TV, this genre, 6 to 8 episodes.
And it needs to work for this sort of audience, because we're finding that we haven't got anything that's really kicking a goal for that demographic. And we notice that in this, either the viewing data or whatever it is. So they're the conversations you probably, it doesn't help you if your slate is all sort of the other thing, but it can allow you to understand and maybe come with a diverse sort of set of thinking about either adapting what you have or coming with a mixed model about what it is you can offer people and spin in the conversation. Because it's often those stories about, I came with this idea, and then someone just, as you were leaving, said, oh, what else have you got? And you haven't ever thought you'd pull it out of your pocket. You go, oh, but I've got this thing called, this competition about Lego. What do you reckon? You know, it's just less potential. And all of a sudden, that'd be really great. We could do a product spinning and so, you know, people can find that there's something that you don't realise that they know about, but so it's a hard one. But yes, those conversations, I'm not, the risk averse piece feels like it's been something I've heard ever since I've entered the industry many, many years ago. So I don't know that that's changed actually. And things like horror seem to kind of go through a cycle of everyone seems to do it in certain spaces, but not in other spaces. So it's all, it seems to change a lot, and it based on who you last talked to. So I don't know, and it means that, you know, it's maybe there's an element of stick to your knitting. If you know you kind of know what you're doing with a particular genre, or even if you don't know, kind of having a bit of a go at a few things, and sometimes the exact format that they don't know that they want necessarily might spark them up because of who's attached to it, or some sort of twist within it, or an idea or a concept that is absolutely on message. And it might be, you know, these things are conversations with people. They're not usually a single sort of, here's what I've got, do you want it, yes or no? It's the people that the commissioners want to work with will sort of lead the witness and go, okay, so that's the game for an emerging producer or any producer, is to be in a situation where
you can find that
there's
out.
a trusted sort of frame between the people and going, okay, what is it that, could that be adapted in that way? Could this be done in this different way?
Well, I think it can be pitch on demand that you run is a great way, where the 3 or 4 commissioners actually say, here's the brief, here's what we want, here's what we're looking for right now. Whether you've got something in your pocket then and they're ready to go to pitch, or you're working towards something that can sort of help.
Yeah, that's a good. We really like that program, and people who don't know it. It's a scheme in which basically usually streamers are giving people an overview of what they're after, and then people go away and find what they can pitch to them, and then they submit pitches. And then they will select the pitches people to continue to talk to. So it's kind of the problem for, you know, commissioners is there's only so many hours in the day, and there's not thousands of them, and there's thousands of producers really, you know, in terms of ideas and things. So they're trying to filter their time in ways that is the most productive. But from a producing level, you really need to kind of understand where the goalposts are, or else, you know, you're off target, and you've got to have something to direct your energy and your thinking around. So that's where that becomes particularly valuable. And it's done in a sort of a safe sort of, you know, offline-ish space in which it's not just generic sort of, we're after general great ideas with true Australian stories. It's sort of this generic sort of message that they'll be more precise if they're usually be more precise, or they can be more
great.
precise.
I found success in that in terms of going through the process to have a really constructive conversation with Foxtel and an ongoing dialogue on.
Oh yeah, good.
At some stage, you know, all 3, and although it was a pass, you know, as a learning experience, you know, it was great to get even further understanding of how that development process works from the perspective of a commissioner like Foxtel, for example.
I do like the way you say that, because acknowledging there was a pass is not a failure piece. It's keep the project, and it's sort of like you cannot really expect to be. I mean, one hears stories of Hollywood. You know, this was the first idea, and they came, and then they made it, and it was It's just is sort of an unrealistic sort of thing that you can step into the field without any training, without any knowledge, and all of a sudden get the gold medal in the 100-meter race. You know, these things are about years on the ground and time with people and that sort of thing. So I like the way you frame those things, because you've got to keep the glass half full approach to it. Like, I learnt some stuff out of that. That's great.
I think coming from a corporate background, you're used to presenting in front of a group of people and having your plans picked apart and then put back together again. It just makes a better plan. And I think having that consistent, constructive dialogue with people who are actually making the decisions. I've on a number of occasions I've gone back and reshaped my pitch document, or looked at the story again a bit harder and made a few changes that I feel have made it a better. Apart from just the process itself and learning more as a producer how it works. So so it's a great point on understanding what they want and different ways to go about doing that.
And look, they wouldn't be doing that with you unless they saw a pathway with either the relationship and the security of that discussion and an opportunity for collaboration in the future. So that's credit on you.
I take it as a win.
Yeah, no, you should. Absolutely. Nice guys do come first. No, it's true.
Well, I mean, if they're going to give you a lot of money, but also it's a journey, they've got to work with you and know that you're going to deliver a product, but also, we're going to have to work with this creative. What's that going to be like?
Well, you're right. I mean, there's three things to think about. One of them is nice people are important in the industry. The nicest people are the people that have been around this industry the longest, because people want to work with nice people. Then there's a delivery piece where someone can trust that you will break down a wall and get the thing done, and not come to them with moments, and sort of, because that's part of the job of the producer, and it's the scary piece. It's kind of like taking on the responsibility of the production and really only going with major problems to them in different ways. And they want people who will, we've just gone through COVID, who will be able to figure out how to navigate the mess of that.
Yeah, be a bit more resilient and look at solving the problems rather than, or if they do have to go to them with a problem, they've got 3 solutions to choose from.
And not all of them need to be that you've got to put in more money.
I was about to say not all of them are expensive.
But those
producer mindset.
But nice and rapport and that capacity to deliver is just everything. Always, and it is, if you look around who's been in the industry in the way that they've operated for a long time, you'll find that is a common set of traits that people have got. Yeah.
I think just one last thing to touch on, IP and the risk of IP drain from Australia. I know that's...
it's big for us.
Yeah. Why?
Yeah.
Why is it big for you guys at the moment?
Look, when people are creating something, the product that they're creating, yes, there's something you can see on screens, but the intangible sort of piece that's being built is IP.
Yeah.
It's the intellectual property of the works. And a producer has to kind of scour walls, climb through whatever, dodge to get that bit of IP.
Negotiate China title.
Yeah. All the work is in this sort of amorphous thing called IP in it. And it is everything from the rights to Bluey and the capacity to control or come up with spin-offs or merchandising or additional series or stage musicals or whatever it is. The intellectual property is a really core part of the picture. Now, in a normal world, that is a combined asset of the production company and possibly creators and others, that are part of the team of that work, or depending on how it's ironed out. But that is the really valuable piece that keeps everyone going. It is the basis by which the work is reworked or relicensed, or it enables people to sink money into a long-term plan for their businesses and security of employment for a lot of people around them. So without that, it also strengthens and builds the industry so that you've got a better developed concept for the next time you go into bat for something or with someone. So without that, you end up being very rootless as a sector. You kind of are grafting and moving on to other people's IP, which if we let it be unchecked, increasingly will just be American intellectual property that is being produced into Australia, in which, look, we love working with international people. They've got resources and skills and many things, but that is both a cultural problem but also a business problem where people will work for the dollar and not have anything to show for it as an ongoing piece of resource that can then build a sector. I always go, there's a difference between an Uber business versus an Uber driver, and we need Uber businesses. Of course we want the drivers, but you sort of need the people who are coming up with the concepts and grounding them into Australia. And that is the challenge in our market, is that it's the same as the grocery industry. You've got a handful of huge businesses that are designed to sort of, I don't know, pillage, fishing trawl, the kind of everything out of a contract, and that is the
leverage
job
their
of
position
those,
of power. Threaten to copy your product themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the job of the business affairs people at those businesses to do that. They're there, okay, this is our deal, these are our terms, sign the dotted line, or you don't get it. You don't get to pay and play. We're not going to commission your work. And if you're on the haven't had a commission, often new producers will fall into a trap of having given everything away. Now, sometimes that's a calculated decision. In order to get something made,
get it done.
You will do that. But there is, an increasing need for a framework or support pieces around either the money that goes into the sector or the way that the regulation works, so that people have got some leverage to fight that back. Otherwise, we don't have any resource.
But what could that look like? How would you be able to?
So in other territories, like France, you have a system by which you never give away secondary rights in products as part of that regulated scheme they've got. You never, they can't, give away merchandising and everything to the commissioner.
Right.
And the broadcast rights revert back to the production company after 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
So that the asset always remains in the belly of the production business that's been commissioned. Now, it's not for every dollar that's commissioned, but they say, I think it's 2/3 of the money that's being done through that scheme, the investment scheme, has to be done that way. And we go, well, that's a pretty good model. I mean, in Australia, traditionally, we've had 2 mechanisms that have assisted producers to hold their rights. One of them is when Screen Australia is investing in equity, they insist that the terms be more reasonable for the producer, and that means the producer holds intellectual property when Screen Australia's at the table.
Right.
When it's a grant based under $500,000, that doesn't exist as a form, but it can mean that even if Screen Australia's at the table, they're watching and going, look, we're not going to put that in if you screw people over this way. So that helps the producer to sort of go, look,
don't
sorry,
give everything away.
I'd love to be able to give you my firstborn and secondborn, but these people in government, whoops, they don't want to do it. But it's a great way to kind of, protect the business.
Give you a bit more position of power in that negotiation.
The second thing that went the way of the dodo was a regulation of the commercial free-to-air broadcasters up until 2021, when it got changed, had a scheme by which you got more points and an earlier acquittal when you were working with production companies but paying a certain high licence fee, which is a form of... A licence fee is valuable because it's not ownership of the content; it's a resource given to the business for the use of the works, and it should just be the primary use of the works. So a high licence fee mandated in other schemes or it gives the production business the ongoing more greater control of the product. So that's one way to do it. It's also you can tie it to offsets or other things. But I don't know where we're at with it. It's pretty critical that this gets done in some way, or and businesses are on notice that they should be fighting against this, and that streamers are on notice that people are watching their behaviours. So, all of this is probably an ongoing conversation. One of the things that's frustrating in this sort of a job and in this industry is that the work's never done. There's always another horizon, and that one thing gets solved, another thing pops out the side, or that things get sort of half solved and you've got to keep going at them for a long time. So it's a bit like producing maybe, but
Yeah.
an ongoing challenge with people to get things sorted.
Yeah, that's great. Well, look, thank you very much. You've touched on some great insights, and I really feel like I'm walking away with a even greater understanding of what the market looks like today and what's coming.
Yeah.
Which is great. So, Matthew Dino, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Two Unemployed Actors, Max Belmonte, and make sure you download and follow. Thank you.
Two unemployed actors.